The courtroom smells like old wood and nervous sweat. I've been sitting here for 40 minutes, listening to Thomas talk about me like I'm not even in the room. Like I'm some kind of broken thing he needs to explain to everyone. She's too emotional to handle business, he says, leaning back in his chair like he's already won. That's why our marriage failed. Women like her can't separate feelings from logic. My lawyer, Mr. Phillips, shifts uncomfortably beside me. He wants to object, but this isn't a trial. This is just a divorce settlement hearing. Thomas can say whatever he wants, and Judge Henderson has to listen. I watch Thomas's mouth move. He's wearing the blue tie I bought him 3 Christmases ago. He probably doesn't even remember. He never remembered things like that. Your Honor, my client simply wants what's fair, Claire Morrison says. She's Thomas's attorney, and she's young and sharp and thinks she's the smartest person in every room. Mr. Adams built Adams Construction from the ground up. His ex-wife contributed some initial capital, yes, but that was a gift made during the marriage. She has no legal claim to the business itself. Some initial capital. $200,000 from my inheritance. The money that paid for everything when we started. The money that kept us afloat the first 2 years when nobody trusted a new construction company. But sure, let's call it some initial capital. Judge Henderson looks tired. She's probably heard 1,000 cases just like this one. Angry divorced couples fighting over money and houses. And who gets the good plates? She doesn't know this case is different. Nobody knows. Thomas is still talking. He can't help himself. When he gets confident, he talks too much. She cried over spreadsheets, Your Honor, he says, and some people in the courtroom actually laugh. I'd come home and find her upset because a vendor was rude to her on the phone. That's not someone who can handle the pressure of running a real business. That's someone who needs to be protected from harsh realities. My hands are folded in my lap. I learnt a long time ago to keep them still when Thomas talks about me. If I fidget, he calls it proof that I'm nervous. If I clench them, he says I'm angry and unstable. So I keep them soft and still, resting on the folder in front of me. The brown folder that contains everything. Judge Henderson glances at me. Mrs. Brooks, do you have a response to these characterizations? I could tell her about the time I negotiated our first major contract because Thomas insulted the client in the initial meeting. I could tell her about the spreadsheets I cried over because Thomas had miscalculated costs and nearly bankrupted us. I could tell her that the harsh realities I needed protection from were usually Thomas's mistakes that I had to fix quietly. But I don't say any of that. May I approach the bench, Your Honor? I ask instead. Thomas smirks. He thinks I'm going to beg, or cry, or make some emotional appeal about how unfair he's being. That's what he's expecting. That's what he's been preparing Claire to counter. I stand up. My legs are steady. I've imagined this moment for 18 months, and now that it's here, I feel calm, cold, even. Like ice water runs in my veins instead of blood. I pick up the brown folder and walk toward Judge Henderson. My shoes click on the tile floor. The courtroom is so quiet I can hear every step. Behind me, Thomas whispers something to Claire. I catch the word desperate. They both chuckle. They actually chuckle. Judge Henderson watches me approach. She has kind eyes, but they've seen too much nonsense to be soft. I respect that about her. I hand her the folder. What's this? She asks, opening it. A sales contract, Your Honor. Finalized and notarized. I watch her face as she reads. Her eyebrows rise slowly. She reads the first page, flips to the second, then goes back to the first like she can't believe what she's seeing. Then something amazing happens. She smiles. Not a polite courtroom smile. A real one. The kind of smile that means she's genuinely impressed. Mr. Adams, Judge Henderson says, looking up from the papers. You should probably look at this. Thomas waves his hand like he's swatting away a fly. Your Honor, whatever emotional appeal my wife is making. Ex-wife, I say. It's the first time I've spoken directly to him in this courtroom. My voice doesn't shake. It doesn't rise. It's just a simple correction. but it lands like a slap. Thomas's jaw tightens. It's not an appeal, Mr. Adams, Judge Henderson continues. She's still smiling, and now I realize she's enjoying this. It's a sales contract. Finalized and notarized. Last night at 11:47 p.m., to be exact. Thomas frowns. I can see his brain working, trying to figure out what game I'm playing. Sales contract? For what? Judge Henderson looks directly at him. For Adams Construction. The company you've been fighting so hard to keep. The courtroom goes completely silent. Even the court reporter stops typing. Your ex-wife now owns it, Judge Henderson says. She pauses, and I know she's savoring this moment as much as I am. You just became her employee. The explosion is immediate. People gasp. Someone in the back row actually says, "Oh my God," loud enough for everyone to hear. The journalists who've been bored out of their minds suddenly sit up straight, pens flying across notebooks. Thomas's face goes white, then red, then purple. He looks like he might actually have a heart attack right here in the courtroom. Claire grabs the folder from the judge's desk. Her confident expression cracks as she reads. I watch her lips move, see her finger trace the same paragraphs over and over, looking for the mistake that isn't there. This can't be legal, Thomas stammers. He's standing now, gripping the table like it's the only thing keeping him upright. Judge Henderson looks at Claire. Counselor, is there a legal issue with this contract? Claire's mouth opens and closes. She looks at Thomas, then back at the papers, then at me. For the first time since this hearing started, she has no answer ready. I stand there, watching 12 years of invisibility end in a single moment. But you don't know how I got here yet. You don't know about the 18 months of planning, the late nights with Leonard, the careful moves I made while Thomas thought I was falling apart. Let me take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you about the 12 years I spent invisible, and how I learned to become the kind of woman who could pull this off. Let me tell you how Thomas Adams handed me the tools for his own destruction. One dismissive comment at a time. I was 22 when I met Thomas Adams. That feels like a different lifetime now. Like I'm remembering someone else's story. I'd just finished university with a degree in business management. Top of my class, actually, though I never made a big deal about it. My father ran a small investment firm, and I worked there as an analyst. Nothing glamorous, mostly spreadsheets and client calls, and learning how money actually moves in the real world. Thomas came to our office on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I remember because it was raining, and he didn't have an umbrella. His hair was wet, his jacket was dripping, and he had this huge smile like getting soaked was the best thing that had happened to him all day. He was meeting with my father about a small business loan. He wanted to start his own construction company. He'd been working as a supervisor for years, he said, and he was tired of making other people rich. He had dreams. Big ones. I sat in on the meeting taking notes. That was my job back then. Sit quietly, take notes, learn by watching. Thomas talked for an hour straight. He had energy that filled the whole room. He made building houses sound like painting masterpieces. He told my father about the company he'd create, the jobs he'd provide, the neighborhoods he'd improve. My father was skeptical. Thomas had no collateral, no business plan on paper, just enthusiasm and promises. After he left, my father asked me what I thought. He needs structure, I said. But the passion is real. People like that either crash and burn or build empires. Nothing in between. My father smiled. Which do you think he'll do? I didn't know. Not then. Thomas came back the next week, and the week after that. My father kept saying no to the loan, but Thomas kept showing up. On his fourth visit, he asked if I wanted to get coffee. I should have said no. But I was 22, and he was handsome, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. When you're young and someone looks at you like that, you forget to ask why. We got coffee, then dinner, then coffee again. Within 2 months, we were inseparable. Thomas told me I was different from other women he'd dated. I was smart, he said. I understood business. I could be his partner, not just his girlfriend. We could build something amazing together. I believed every word. 6 months after that first rainy Tuesday, Thomas proposed. We were in my tiny apartment, eating takeout Chinese food, and he just pulled out a ring. Not expensive. He couldn't afford expensive. But it was real, and so was the look in his eyes. Marry me, he said. Be my partner. Let's build an empire. I said yes before he even finished talking. My father didn't love the idea. You're young, Natalie, he told me the next day. You have your whole career ahead of you. Are you sure you want to tie yourself to someone who has nothing but dreams right now? I love him, I said. Like that explained everything. My father sighed. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I didn't understand until years later. Love doesn't protect you from becoming invisible. But I wasn't listening. I was planning a wedding and a future and believing in a man who talked about us like we were a team. 2 months before the wedding, my father did something that changed everything. He gave me my inheritance early. $200,000 that was supposed to come to me when I turned 30. Use it wisely, he said. Build something that's yours, not just his. I should have heard the warning in those words. Thomas and I registered Adams Construction 3 weeks after we got married. I wanted both our names on the papers. Thomas said it was simpler to just use his name for legal reasons. Banks preferred dealing with one owner, he explained. We could always add me later. I trusted him. The first 2 years were good. Actually good. We worked side by side every single day. I handled the finances, managed the schedules, dealt with suppliers. Thomas ran the crews and met with clients. My $200,000 paid for everything. Equipment, insurance, permits, wages when jobs ran long and clients paid late. I watched that money disappear into the business like water into sand. But Thomas said that's how you build something real. We're investing in our future, he'd say. Our future. I loved how that sounded. I was the one who landed our first major contract. The client's name was Mrs. Patterson, and she wanted to renovate her daughter's house before the wedding. Thomas met with her first, and he came back frustrated. She's impossible, he said. Wants everything custom but doesn't want to pay custom prices. She kept interrupting me with questions. I called Mrs. Patterson the next day. I listened to what she actually wanted. I realized she wasn't being difficult. She was scared. She'd hired contractors before who'd cut corners and disappeared. She needed someone who'd treat her daughter's house like it mattered. I spent 3 hours on the phone with her. I broke down every cost. I explained every choice. I sent her examples and references and a timeline she could understand. She signed the contract for $45,000. Thomas was thrilled. He took his crew out to celebrate that night. A business dinner, he called it. I wasn't invited. You'd be bored, he said, kissing my forehead like I was a child. It's just construction talk and beer, not your scene. I stayed home and updated our financial projections instead. That was the first time I was left out of celebrating something I'd done. It wouldn't be the last. By year 3, a pattern had formed. I'd handle the difficult clients, the complicated logistics, the financial planning. Thomas would show up for the handshakes and the congratulations. At company events, people would ask what I did. This is just my wife, Thomas would say before I could answer. Just my wife. Like that was my whole job description. I started noticing other things too. When I'd suggest an idea in meetings, Thomas would nod and move on. Then 2 days later, he'd present the same idea like he'd thought of it himself. When it worked, people would clap him on the back and call him brilliant. I told myself it didn't matter. We were building this together. His success was my success. That's what you tell yourself when you're disappearing and don't want to admit it. By year 5, Thomas hired an accountant to help me out with the finances. You're working too hard, he said. Let someone else handle the boring number stuff. The boring number stuff was the only thing I still did for the company. Then he hired a project manager, then an office manager, One by one, my responsibilities were given to other people. People with job titles and business cards and paychecks. I became the wife who answered phones sometimes. The wife who brought cookies to the office on Fridays. The wife who smiled and stayed quiet when Thomas talked business with real professionals. I kept the house perfect. I entertained clients in our home. I made Thomas look good. And slowly, year by year, I became invisible. The affair wasn't even a surprise. That's the saddest part. By year 10, I'd already felt Thomas slipping away for so long that finding him with another woman almost felt inevitable. I was supposed to be at my mother's house that night. She'd been sick with pneumonia, and I'd been staying with her for 3 days. But she improved faster than expected, and her neighbor offered to check on her, so I came home early. It was just past 9 o'clock. The bedroom light was on. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to sounds I'll never forget. Then I opened the door. Thomas didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. The woman grabbed her clothes and ran past me. I didn't look at her face. It didn't matter who she was. "Natalie, listen." Thomas started. "Don't," I said. He didn't listen. He never listened. "What did you expect?" he said, pulling on his pants like we were discussing the weather. "You're not exactly exciting anymore. You've let yourself go. When's the last time you even tried?" I looked down at myself. Jeans and a sweater. No makeup because I'd been taking care of my sick mother. Hair in a ponytail. 32 years old, and exhausted from a decade of making myself smaller and smaller to fit into whatever space Thomas allowed me. "I want a divorce," I said. Thomas laughed. Actually laughed. "Fine," he said. "But you'll get nothing. That company is mine. You're just a housewife. You have no proof you contributed anything." He said it so casually. Like erasing 10 years of my work was easy. Like I'd never mattered at all. I left that night, packed a bag and drove to a hotel and sat on the bed staring at the wall until sunrise. And that's when I remembered Leonard Gray. Leonard was my father's oldest friend. They'd gone to university together back when nobody thought 2 working-class kids from nothing could make it in finance. My father started his small firm. Leonard went bigger, became one of the most respected investment bankers in the state. He'd come to my father's funeral 6 years ago. He'd hugged me and told me if I ever needed anything at all, I should call him. I called him at 8 in the morning from that hotel room. "Natalie Brooks," he said when he answered, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." We met at his office 3 days later. It was nothing like my father's small firm. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Modern art on the walls. Everything was glass and steel and money. Leonard was 62, but looked 50. Sharp suit, kind eyes. He ordered coffee and pastries like we were old friends catching up. Not like I was a woman whose life had just fallen apart. I told him everything. The inheritance. The company. The 10 years of becoming invisible. The affair. Thomas's promise that I'd get nothing. Leonard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want to just survive this divorce?" he finally asked. "Or do you want to win?" Something cold and clear settled in my chest. "I want everything," I said. Leonard smiled. "Then let's get to work." The first thing he taught me was patience. Thomas expected me to fall apart, so I'd fall apart. Publicly. Loudly. I'd be exactly what he thought I was. "Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake," Leonard said. "And Thomas is going to make plenty of mistakes." I stayed in the house during the separation. Thomas moved in with his girlfriend for a few weeks, then came back after she got tired of him. We lived like hostile strangers, but I played my role perfectly. The sad wife. The broken woman. I cried where he could hear me. I let the house get a little messy. I looked overwhelmed and lost. Thomas ate it up. He told his friends I was having a breakdown. Poor Natalie. Can't handle reality. Too emotional. Just like he always said. Meanwhile, Leonard was teaching me everything Thomas should have seen in me a decade ago. I had a gift for this, for strategy, for seeing patterns, for understanding what people wanted and how to give it to them in exchange for what I needed. Leonard helped me get a job at a consulting firm under my maiden name. Brooks Consulting had no idea I was Thomas Adams's estranged wife. Why would they? I was just another analyst. I was good at it, better than good. Within 6 months, I was handling major accounts. My boss kept praising my instincts, my attention to detail, my ability to read situations, all the skills I'd developed keeping Thomas's company running while he took credit. At night, I studied Adams Construction like it was a case study for work. Leonard had connections everywhere. He showed me how to access public records, financial filings, industry reports. The picture that emerged was ugly. Adams Construction looked successful from the outside. Nice office. Big projects. Thomas drove an expensive truck and wore expensive watches. But the numbers told a different story. He'd overextended on 3 major projects, borrowed heavily from multiple sources. He was juggling payments, robbing Peter to pay Paul, keeping everything afloat through charm and credit. The company I'd helped build was drowning in debt. He's bleeding money, Leonard said, showing me the spreadsheets. He takes on projects to cover the debt from previous projects. It's a cycle. Eventually it collapses. How long does he have? I asked. A year. Maybe 2 if he's lucky. I started going to industry events, construction conferences, building expos, places Thomas never expected to see me, because he'd decided I didn't belong in that world. I talked to people, asked questions, listened. I learned which contractors Thomas had underpaid, which suppliers he'd cheated, which clients he'd overcharged and then charmed into accepting it. Everyone had a Thomas story, and none of them were good. I met a supplier named Harold at a conference in September. He'd provided materials for one of Thomas's early projects and never been fully paid. Still owes me $18,000, Harold said, shaking his head. But what can you do? Taking him to court costs more than I'd recover. What if someone bought that debt from you? I asked casually. Harold looked at me curiously. You know someone interested in buying old contractor debt? Maybe, I said. That conversation changed everything. Leonard explained how debt purchasing worked. Companies buy debt for less than face value, then try to collect the full amount. It's risky, but potentially profitable. More importantly, if you own someone's debt, you own leverage. Through Leonard's firm and several shell companies, I started quietly buying Adams Construction's debt. $18,000 from Harold, $32,000 from a lumber supplier, $45,000 from a concrete company. It took months. It took most of my savings and loans Leonard helped me secure. But piece by piece, I bought leverage. Thomas never noticed. He was too busy with his new girlfriend and fighting me in court over the dining room table and the car I didn't even want. He thought those were the battles that mattered. 18 months after I found him with that woman, I sat in Leonard's office looking at spreadsheets that showed I controlled 68% of Adams Construction's debt. Ready for the final phase? Leonard asked. I thought about 10 years of being invisible. 10 years of my ideas coming out of Thomas's mouth. 10 years of just my wife. Call his creditors, I said. Tell them I'm making an offer. The final phase moved faster than I expected. Leonard's firm contacted the bank holding Thomas's defaulted personal loan first. The loan he'd taken out using Adams Construction as collateral. The loan he'd been quietly missing payments on for 8 months. The message was simple. An anonymous investor was willing to pay off Adams Construction's debts in full. In exchange, they wanted ownership of the company. Thomas could stay on as an employee with a generous salary. Or he could pay back $3 million immediately. Thomas received the notification on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks before our final divorce hearing. I know because I was still living in the house. We'd barely spoken in months, but I heard him on the phone that night. Heard the panic in his voice as he called his accountant, his lawyer, everyone he could think of. $3 million? Where am I supposed to get $3 million? I made dinner in the kitchen while he shouted in his office. Pasta. Simple. I ate alone at the table like I'd done 1,000 times before. The next morning, Thomas looked like he hadn't slept. There were papers spread across his office desk, financial statements, loan documents. He was trying to find a way out. There wasn't one. I'd made sure of that. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Thomas try everything. He called investors, offering minority stakes in the company. Nobody wanted in. The construction industry in our city was smaller than people thought. Word had spread about his financial troubles. More importantly, word had spread about how he treated people. The contractors he'd underpaid. The workers he'd blamed when things went wrong. The credit he'd stolen from everyone around him. People remembered. He tried to get a loan to buy out the mysterious investor. Every bank said no. His credit was destroyed. He'd borrowed from too many places, burned too many bridges. I watched him unravel day by day, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No guilt. Just cold certainty that this was justice. Claire advised him to take the buyout deal. I heard them talking in his office one afternoon when she came by the house. "You'll still have a job," she said. "A good salary. Benefits. You can rebuild your reputation and eventually buy the company back." Thomas hated it. I could hear it in his voice. "I built that company from nothing," he said. I almost laughed. He actually believed that. He'd convinced himself so completely that my inheritance, my work, my ideas had never mattered. In his mind, he really had built it all alone. Claire drew up the employment contract. She negotiated with Brookstone Holdings lawyers. Everything was done through email and video calls. Thomas never met the new owners face to face. He never asked who they were. He was too focused on himself, on his anger, on preparing to humiliate me one last time in court. Leonard's lawyers were brilliant. The contract was airtight. Market rate salary for a senior project manager. Benefits. Even a performance bonus structure. It looked generous. What Thomas didn't understand was that he'd gone from owner to employee. From the man who made decisions to the man who followed them. My divorce attorney, Mr. Phillips, kept asking me why I seemed so calm. "Thomas is going to fight hard for the company," he warned me, again and again. "His lawyer is very good. We might lose." "I know," I'd say. "Do your best." He thought I'd given up, that I was just going through the motions before Thomas crushed me in court. Perfect. The night before the hearing, Leonard and I met at his office one last time. The final paperwork sat on his desk. The sale of Adams Construction from its creditors to Brookstone Holdings LLC, my company. My name hidden in a corporate structure Thomas had never bothered to investigate. "Once he signs this, it's done," Leonard said. "He'll own nothing. You'll own everything." I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. 12 years of marriage. 10 years of being erased. I thought about every time Thomas had introduced me as just my wife. Every idea he'd stolen. Every contribution he'd dismissed. I signed my name. The documents were couriered to Thomas at 8 that evening. A note attached. "Final sale documents for Adams Construction. Sign and return by morning to complete the transaction and secure your employment." I went home. Thomas was in his office, and I could hear him on the phone with Claire. "She's already reviewed it," he was saying. "It's fine. I just need to sign and get this over with." At 11:47 p.m., I was in my bedroom when I heard the notification on my phone. The sale was complete. Thomas had signed. Adams Construction was mine. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, holding my phone. The company built with my inheritance. Sustained by my work. Grown through my ideas that Thomas had claimed as his own. Finally, legally, officially mine. I didn't sleep that night. I showered at 5 in the morning. Put on the navy suit I'd bought specifically for this day. Did my makeup carefully. Looked at myself in the mirror. The invisible wife was gone. Someone stronger looked back at me. Someone who'd spent 18 months learning to be ruthless. Someone who'd outplayed a man who'd never believed she could. Time to become visible, I whispered to my reflection. I drove to the courthouse at 7. Sat in my car for 30 minutes, breathing slowly, preparing. Thomas had no idea what was about to happen. He thought today was about him proving I was too emotional for business. He'd prepared a whole speech. I'd heard him practicing it last night. She's too emotional to handle business. I smiled. Let him say it. Let him say it in front of the judge and everyone there. It would make what came next so much sweeter. The courtroom is packed when I arrive. More people than usual for a simple divorce hearing. Word must have spread that Thomas Adams was going to put on a show. He's already at his table with Claire, looking confident. He barely glances at me when I sit down with Mr. Phillips. Why would he? In his mind, I'm already defeated. Judge Henderson enters, and we all stand. She settles into her chair and looks over the day's docket with the expression of someone who's seen this same story 1,000 times. Thomas doesn't waste any time. As soon as the judge asks for opening statements, he launches into his performance. Your Honor, this should be a straightforward case, he says, standing up even though he doesn't need to. I built Adams Construction from the ground up. My ex-wife contributed some initial capital during the marriage, but the business success is entirely due to my leadership and vision. He goes on and on about his sacrifice, his hard work, his business acumen. Then he pivots to me. Your Honor, I don't say this to be cruel, but the court needs to understand why my ex-wife cannot have any claim to my company. She's too emotional to handle business. That's why our marriage failed. Women like her can't separate feelings from logic. The courtroom goes quiet. A few people shift uncomfortably. Judge Henderson's expression doesn't change, but I see her fingers tighten slightly on her pen. Thomas keeps going, emboldened by his own voice. She cried over spreadsheets, Your Honor. I'd come home and find her upset because a vendor was rude on the phone. That's not someone who can handle the pressure of running a real business. He's saying exactly what I knew he'd say. What he's been telling himself for years to justify erasing me from the story. Mr. Phillips starts to object, but I put my hand on his arm. Not yet. Your Honor, Claire adds smoothly. Mr. Adams simply wants what's fair. He built this company through his own effort and skill. Miss Brooks deserves a fair settlement, of course, but she has no legitimate claim to Adams Construction itself. Judge Henderson looks at me. Miss Brooks, do you have a response to these characterizations? This is it. I stand up slowly. Every eye in the courtroom is on me. May I approach the bench, Your Honor? Thomas actually smirks. I see it from the corner of my eye. He thinks I'm about to beg. I pick up the brown folder. The one Leonard and I prepared with such care. Inside is every document that proves what I'm about to do is completely legal. My shoes click on the tile floor as I walk to Judge Henderson's bench. The courtroom is so silent I can hear someone breathing heavily in the back row. I hand her the folder. She opens it, and I watch her face carefully. Her eyebrows rise. She reads the first page, then the second, then goes back to the first. Then she smiles. It's not a polite smile. It's the smile of someone who's about to witness justice. Mr. Adams, she says, looking up. You should probably look at this. Thomas waves his hand dismissively. Your Honor, whatever emotional appeal my wife is making. Ex-wife? I say clearly. He stops. Looks at me. Really looks at me for the first time in months. It's not an appeal, Mr. Adams. Judge Henderson continues, and now she's definitely enjoying this. It's a sales contract. Finalized and notarized, last night at 11:47 p.m., to be exact. The confusion on Thomas's face would be funny if this wasn't so serious. Sales contract? For what? Judge Henderson doesn't look away from him. For Adams Construction, the company you've been fighting so hard to keep. She pauses. Your ex-wife now owns it. You just became her employee. The courtroom explodes. Gasps. Someone swears. The journalists in the back start scribbling frantically. Thomas's face goes white, then red, then almost purple. He grabs the edge of the table. "This is fraud," he shouts. "She manipulated." The judge's gavel comes down hard. "Mr. Adams, sit down and control yourself, or I'll have you removed from this courtroom." Claire snatches the folder, her confident mask cracking as she reads. I watch her eyes move faster and faster across the pages, looking for the loophole that isn't there. "Thomas, this is legitimate," she says quietly. "The sale is legal. You signed it last night." "I signed a buyout agreement with Brookstone Holdings." Thomas is standing again, his voice breaking. "Brookstone Holdings, I say," and my voice carries across the silent courtroom, "is my company. I am Brookstone Holdings." The noise level doubles. Judge Henderson lets it go for a moment before restoring order. Thomas turns to me with pure hatred in his eyes. "You manipulated me. You tricked me into signing. I offered to buy a failing company from its creditors," I say calmly. "You signed a legal contract without reading it carefully. That's not manipulation, Mr. Adams. That's bad business. You used insider information. I used publicly available financial records and legitimate business channels." I gesture toward the back of the courtroom where Leonard sits. "Everything I did was legal. My attorney can confirm." Thomas sees Leonard and his face goes grey. Leonard Gray. One of the most respected names in finance. Thomas finally understands this wasn't impulsive. This was planned, calculated, executed perfectly while he thought I was broken. Claire tries one last time. "Your Honor, there must be grounds for..." "For what, Counselor?" Judge Henderson cuts her off. "Your client signed a legal contract. He accepted employment terms. The sale was conducted through proper channels with full approval from creditors and regulatory authorities. Unless you can show me actual fraud, this is a done deal." Claire has nothing. Judge Henderson looks at Thomas, and there's something almost like pity in her eyes. "Mr. Adams, you spent this entire proceeding arguing that your ex-wife was too emotional and incapable of handling business matters." She gestures to the documents. "Instead, you've just proven the opposite. She executed one of the most sophisticated business acquisitions I've seen presented in my courtroom." Thomas slumps into his chair,